Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about some different labs that you can get done that look at if you're dealing with chronic low-level inflammation in your body. We know everybody's talking about, different respiratory illnesses, and this is something all of us, obviously we want to do our best to avoid, and certainly we want to avoid having a complication with respiratory illness. When somebody has a really major complication, and guys, I'm saying respiratory illness. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. But really, we could talk about a lot of things: pneumonia, the flu, lots of different issues. When somebody's having a serious event with it, it really has to do with an underlying hyperinflamed state. So the hyperinflammation was kind of like pouring gasoline on the stove, and then the infection came in, and that was just, the flick of a switch, right? It was just kind of lighting the stove that was already loaded up with gas, right? So of course it creates that explosion, and that's really what's happening with people. So to prevent against a serious adverse event or some sort of major issue with a respiratory infection, you can look at some different labs to see what your underlying level of inflammation is. And so my top 7 labs are these. Number 1, and this one, if you just get a complete blood count, you'll be able to look at this. It is your red blood cell width. So the width of your red blood cell, normally it should be below 13%. And so if it's above that, right, if the red blood cell gets wider, okay, then what happens is that's actually a sign of inflammation. In fact, there's research that links that with a condition called inflammaging, right, where inflammation is actually accelerating the aging process in us. So, if you're looking at it, normally your red blood cell width, average individuals typically around 12% or so. If it's up above 13, that is a sign of inflammation. Another one is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This is an inflammatory protein that the body produces to help prevent against infections, right? And so if we have inflammation, high sensitivity CRP may be elevated. Now, it's not always elevated for every individual. For some individuals, it could be in really healthy range, but they still have inflammation. And that's why I'm going to talk about other markers. But, it's probably the most well thought out or well researched lab for inflammation. And so high sensitivity C-reactive protein, you should be asking your doctor to get that done. And we want that to be under 1. So that should really be under 1. And if it's up above 1, you have a level of chronic or, could be acute level of inflammation, but you're in a hyperinflamed state. So we're looking at high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Another one is ESR, or erythrocyte sedimentation rate. So the ESR should normally be under 10. And what this really is it's basically how fast your red blood cells kind of drop in a tube, right? And so it should be under 10 millimeters per hour, okay? If it is 20 millimeters per hour or more, that's a sign of inflammation in the body. It's a sign that the red blood cells are really clumping together. You can also look at platelets. A good platelet level should usually be between like 175 and 250, somewhere around there. If your platelets are really high or really low, that can indicate inflammation, and like a low platelet level could also indicate some issue with your immune system, right? Immune suppressed issues. So definitely good things to be looking at. And those, ESR platelet levels are typically, or certainly platelets are typically checked on, a lot of routine labs. So you can really be looking at that. You can ask for that ESR test. Again, a good one to look at. We also have to look at blood sugar. Hemoglobin A1C, for example. That is a measurement of your blood sugar over the course of a 3-month period of time. Normally, and really it's looking at what's called glycation, or the damage to red blood cells from sugar. So sugar molecules, when they're in your blood, they will actually cause damage to the red blood cells, and we call that glycation. Now, normally we should have a very low percentage of our blood cells being glycated. That should really be ideally under 5%, or not much more above 5%. So if you are, 5.5, 5.6, right? 5.7 is kind of the cutoff for pre-diabetes, and then 6.0 is diabetes, right? We actually have a diabetic state. So really, for ideal blood sugar stability, I like to see that under 5. So 5 or less, 4.5 to 5, let's say, somewhere in that range. It's telling me you're keeping your blood sugar very, very stable over time. And we know that's so important because we know that an elevated blood sugar, like a blood sugar of 120, actually reduces your immune system's ability to scavenge pathogens like viruses by 75%. Can you believe that? 75% reduction when you have a blood sugar of 120. So if you have a hemoglobin A1C level up around 5.7, 5.8, that's a sign you're in that condition. You're having a blood sugar of 120 or more a lot, right? You're in that place quite often, and so you are significantly suppressing your immune function. So clearly that's going to be a big problem. So we want to get that, again, under 5, 4.5 to 5, somewhere in that range is where I'm looking at. And then fasting insulin. So you can ask your doctor, hey, can you test my fasting insulin level? This is super critical test because you might have good blood sugar stability, but you might have high insulin levels. And so we want to keep the insulin levels down and under control. So we're looking at, really we want to keep your insulin around 2 to 5, okay? When it's up above that, high insulin also triggers more inflammation and activates more inflammatory cytokine production. So you're gonna have more inflammation. So if you're testing your fasting insulin, this means that you haven't eaten in 12 hours, 14 hours. So you had dinner, you didn't eat in the morning, you drank water, and then you went in, you got your blood test done, and your insulin is up over 5 or 6, it's let's say 12, 13. That's a sign you are inflamed, you have insulin resistance. Not a good thing. So we want to get that insulin level down, super important. And I'll have other videos, and you guys can check out my channel. We talk a lot about insulin resistance, keeping your blood sugar stable. Today I'm really focused on the lab tests. These are the important ones that you want to be looking at. So anyways, insulin, super important. Vitamin D, so critical. In fact, a big study just came out. It was a meta-analysis, which is kind of your highest rank of studies. Meta-analysis takes all the best studies, right? So all the randomized control studies, observational data, right? Takes everything, gets rid of ones that don't fit a certain qualifying level, and then just takes all this data, puts it all together to kind of summarize, hey, what does the overall data say, in this case, about vitamin D and the C19 virus, okay? And so what does it say about that? Well, what they actually showed, this was recently published here at the end of March, and they showed that there was an 80% reduction in your ability, or basically in getting hospitalized for COVID if you were vitamin D sufficient. So if you were vitamin D deficient, right, you have a significantly higher risk of being hospitalized for COVID. And so, that is, in my opinion, looking at all the data, it's really the most compelling data that we have out there about anything when it has to do with this particular virus. And so, what do we want to do? We want to optimize our vitamin D levels. So we should be looking at your 25 hydroxy vitamin D3, and you ideally want that. Now, to be deficient, officially you have to be under 30 nanograms per milliliter, but really you want to be up above 50 nanograms per milliliter, really in that 50 to 100, maybe even up to 120 range. I don't really consider it like you're getting too much, like you are toxic, you have toxic levels, until really you're up around 200. But the ideal range is roughly in that 50 to 100 range. If you want to be at your optimal, we're looking at somewhere around 70, 80 nanograms per milliliter is a really good level. Some doctors have experimented and seen really good results with levels, up above 100 nanograms per milliliter, but we just don't have enough research to make recommendations for that. So getting your vitamin D, that's your hydroxy, your 25 OH vitamin D levels. Now, another one that you want to test with that is your 125 vitamin D. That's your calcitriol. Calcitriol is actually the activated form of vitamin D. And in some cases, some individuals will have sufficient levels of hydroxy vitamin D3, but insufficient levels of the calcitriol, the 125 hydroxy vitamin D3. The conversion takes place there in the kidneys, where hydroxy D3 turns into 125 hydroxy D3, goes to the cells and activates the VDR receptor. Now, there are a couple reasons for this, why somebody may not have enough of the active vitamin D3. One is a vitamin A deficiency. So you can test this as well. You really want your levels to be roughly between 35 and 60. If you're deficient in vitamin A really helps with the activation of vitamin D when it gets into the cell, right? So that's important. Magnesium, this is critical. A lot of people are deficient in magnesium. It's a huge deficiency, and you need that for all the steps of the conversion of vitamin D into the active form of the 125 vitamin D calcitriol. So magnesium is super critical. When you're looking at a blood test, you want it up over 2.0, right? And really more like 2.2 or so when you're looking at a blood test. And you can get that done on your comprehensive metabolic panel. Most doctors are running that, super cheap. So you can look at that for magnesium levels. It's not the best test for magnesium. I really don't have a great test, but it'll at least give you an insight on what's happening there. If you're under 2.0, you definitely need to support your magnesium levels. That could be an issue. So those things are very important to be looking at when it comes to your overall inflammatory balance. One other good thing that would really help to look at would be your plasma zinc to serum copper level, right? So zinc and copper are two critical trace minerals. We absolutely need them for metabolic function, for immune function, and they compete with each other. So when we take copper, for example, that will actually increase our absorption or our utilization of zinc. Zinc may go down a little bit. If we take zinc alone, copper may go down a little bit. Now, everybody's saying, take zinc, take zinc, take zinc, and that is really important. But it's also good to look at where your copper levels are. Now, most people absorb copper better than they absorb zinc, right? So you need a lot of stomach acid, good stomach acid production in order to absorb zinc. Copper, not as much. So if I test somebody that's at a baseline that is not supplementing with zinc, typically they have a lot more copper than zinc. And we want our plasma zinc to serum copper. That's what we're looking at. The amount of zinc in your plasma, the amount of copper in your serum, your blood serum. We want that to be roughly 1 to 1.2, meaning equal parts, zinc to copper, okay? And for example, zinc should really be up above 90, like 90 to 135 is typical range that I'm looking at, somewhere in that range. And we want the ratio to be 1 to 1.2 with copper. So that's basically what we're looking at. So these are important labs that you can get done. So you can ask your doctor. You can go to my website. We have a comprehensive blood analysis that looks at all these and so much more. So these are tests that you can get done to really look at what your underlying immune risk is. I could talk about other labs too, like white blood cells, for example. They should be between 5 and 8. If your white blood cells are below 5 or above 8, if they're above 8, you're probably dealing with some sort of underlying infection to begin with. If they're below 5, you probably have some sort of immune suppression, right? So your immune system is being suppressed for some reason. So all good things to be looking at. So hopefully this is a helpful video for you guys. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do that now and hit the bell button. That way you get notified whenever I put up a new video. And go ahead and ask your questions, comments below. My team and I will be happy to go through those. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in a future video. Be blessed.